I want to talk about endeavors in the self-driving car space that have been surfacing in the last couple of days or weeks. I think as we are defining the Tesla position more and more as an AI software self-driving car type position, I think it's worth looking at those endeavors, understanding what competition is doing, and certainly also keep the humility in check, make sure we don't feel too safe on our pedestal of being the leader in self-driving cars, electric cars, luxury electric cars, because competition is coming. They're doing stuff, and I want to discuss those endeavors. One is Cruise, the other is Waze, actually Waves, excuse me, Waves. One is Cruise. They have a taxi service in San Francisco, full self-drive taxi service, and then Waves is a London-based company doing last mile grocery deliveries with self-driving cars. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's February 23rd, 2022. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we lost around 10%. The market's down about 4%. For the year, we are down 32.2%. The market's down 11.8%. We're underperforming by 20.4%. Massive drawdown driven by the Ukraine crisis with Russia. I just want to say a few words about that and then jump into our topic of today. So the Ukraine crisis in Russia is, I guess, a lot more serious than we thought it might become. The market, at least, is taking it very seriously because we could have a massive outbreak of hostilities, not just there in the Ukraine, but also in other parts of the world. I think there's two things that are scary. One is the sort of irrational stance of Vladimir Putin, which alludes that something else is going on. And this is the second thing. There must be some serious repercussions in Russia itself that we are not aware of that are pushing Putin into this direction, because it just doesn't make sense. And when things don't make sense, markets freak out, and this is exactly what's going on. Now, having said that, of course, we believe that we're still right on our other big macro call that we have, which is peak inflation, peak rates, and sort of two-quarter type recession. We believe that this is now even more likely with this situation going on in Russia, which we think in the long term certainly is a good thing. In the short term, it's painful for us, and the way we deal with these things is we don't trade around them. What we do is we manage our leverage. Right now, our leverage is around 22%, so it's getting up there. Having a drawdown of 32%, of course, is painful. We still have room, but it's nevertheless incredibly painful to deal with this. But we're fine. We don't have to do anything right now. We're not bound by any kind of leverage or anything like that. I just want to remind people the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund, and volatility is part of the business. We've said that many times. This is a good reminder that this is the case. And what that really means is that we can't trade around these things. We cannot catch the bottoms, the peaks. What we can do is invest in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact, put our capital at risk, make sure we can survive drawdowns, and keep growing our assets with the wealth creators that we invested in. Having said that, now let's talk about wealth creation here. We're talking about self-driving cars, which is one of the biggest themes that we invest in through Tesla. And there's been two developments I want to talk about. One is, let's talk about Cruise. They have a license to do self-driving taxis in San Francisco. So this is the beginning of a full self-drive stack actually being deployed fully in a city environment, the first time ever. Not some geofence thing, nothing like that. It's fully deployed, and it's being tested in San Francisco. Let's talk a little bit about the stack. So this is a full stack, LiDAR, HD map, the whole thing. And therefore, it is kind of geofenced in the sense that these cars can only move around in places where they know in advance how it's going to look like. The learning process that is involved is kind of similar to the Tesla learning process. There's a lot of machine learning involved, so statistical pattern seeking, but there's also some hard coding involved. And I think the biggest negative in this situation is, of course, the telecontrol. So there's people that are remotely controlling the cars if something happens. Now, I don't want to necessarily bash that, because it's the beginning, it's the first time. These people don't know exactly how it's going to work out. So I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Nevertheless, I was a bit disappointed when I saw the presentation about this new service, and then the person in charge, the VP of product at Cruise, after probably 45 minutes mentioned that there are people actually in the background telecontrolling the car. So I just feel like there's a little bit of lack of genuine understanding, or excuse me, humility. Like, listen, we're doing something, it's not perfect, and we don't want to bash anybody here. This is what we're doing. I would appreciate that a little bit, instead of this Silicon Valley-esque, narrative of we're changing the world and what we're doing is like, the best thing since sliced bread. This is just sort of a small side note, but let's get back to the stack. What's important here is, of course, that we have a full self-drive stack being deployed in real life with real customers. There's a lot of limits. Like I said, there's geofencing involved, there's HD mapping involved, and there's also the telecontrol involved. So this is by far not perfect, but it's a beginning. It's a good thing. And like somebody said today in an interview that I heard, it's also good to develop the sort of legal infrastructure around these things. And this is the first beginning. Now, how does this compare to Tesla? Well, Tesla, like I said, has a similar approach in terms of architecture. So there's a lot of learning, but there's also some, not hard coding in a sense, but there's a lot of human interaction involved in the learning process. So this is, let's call it guided learning. And as a contrast, there is a full end-to-end learning suite that could be applied, and actually Wayve, the other company I want to talk about, does at least claim to apply that. So this would be the other approach, which we believe in the long term will be the winner. But right now, neither Tesla nor Waymo nor Cruise are using that. I think what's good about the Cruise service is that it's deployed in real life. What's not good is that there's way too many barriers. There's, like I said, there's a LiDAR, there's the HD map, the scalability is in question. The cars themselves are in question. I mean, the Chevy Volt or Bolt or whatever is not exactly the kind of car that I would choose to start doing this kind of service. I would choose a better car, if not a Tesla, maybe something else. But I guess because Cruise is owned by GM, they don't have a choice. So there's a couple of things that I wouldn't do if I was them, or I think are detrimental. They do want to launch a new car, fully self-driven car at some point. All these things are in the works, and I think, as far as Tesla is concerned, I think I need to say a few things here. One is, look, competition is always there, and no matter how rudimentary and maybe inadequate it might look, it is a serious thing. We need to take it seriously, and we need to differentiate Tesla to let's say this particular Cruise situation. And I think the differentiating factor of Tesla is, I would say, first and foremost, the limiting factors of Tesla. They don't have an HD map, they don't have LiDAR, they only rely on cameras. That means that they have to find a solution. This is the key point here. When you listen to these people, the same applies to Wayve, actually not so much to Wayve, but definitely to Cruise, and they say things like, well, LiDAR is the safest, and we want to use all the sensors we have. This is wrong, because you want to limit yourself to the sensors that are scalable in terms of cost and also visual and all that, because then you also are forced to develop algorithms and architectures that deal with the shortcomings of not having, let's say, LiDAR and things like that. So I think it is not the right thing to say, oh, well, we're using everything available, because whatever is available might not be available at scale. So you have to be very careful how you phrase these things, and also how you manage the company. I think it is better to launch a company and a project which from the get-go limits itself to certain constraints that are maybe in the beginning difficult to solve, such as Tesla having only camera and no radar and no LiDAR, but in the long term are much easier to scale because it's cost efficient and also visually much more appealing. So I think that's the biggest drawback, I would say, in this particular approach. And again, it's a good thing to have it. And I think Tesla is certainly here facing a competitor, because there is a chance that this succeeds and that maybe the self-driving technology of Cruise becomes the standard of self-driving and all these things. The good thing about the Tesla approach, of course, is that it is your own car. So there's also a little bit of owning versus not owning. I think there's a lot of use cases where you want to have a full self-driving car that you own, that happens to be a Tesla, with all the other things like the network, the charging network, the software, the updates, all these things are part, of course, of the Tesla package. And my point here is that you could see a parallel universe or parallel development of markets where you have a taxi market and you have an ownership market. But I still think in the long term, the Tesla solution is better, again, because they're using constraints right now that are more difficult from an architecture perspective, but in the long term will be much, much better in terms of scaling, in terms of dealing with problems, and so on and so forth. We don't know exactly what Tesla actually is cooking up in their AI suite. There's been some anecdotal rumors or maybe comments, more precisely, about what to expect, that we will have a lot more things to come in the coming quarters in terms of what Tesla can roll out. Look, I don't want to be too optimistic about what they have in terms of ready to sell in terms of software. But again, in the long term, the solution that Tesla is working on, in our opinion, is the one that has the highest likelihood of success, just because there are constraints in place right now that help Tesla scale. Now let's talk about Wayve, another company based in London. I think what I like about that company, and Peter Abil actually had the founder on his podcast, and that's how I heard about them. And Peter Abil is an investor in that company, which is already a big endorsement, of course. Peter Abil, a very respected researcher from Berkeley. The thing with Wayve is they try to do an end-to-end learning approach. So they are using what we believe is actually the long-term solution to self-driving AI, which is you use a end-to-end learning approach. Now, I'm not quite sure how they're doing that without simulation. I mean, they're talking about doing it in the inner city of London, solving the city, and then being able to scale up from the city. They're using the last mile problem of grocery delivery. All these things are fine. I don't want to go into the details. I don't believe grocery delivery is one of the biggest pressing pain points in life. Maybe there's other situations that are more pressing. But again, here, I think what's good about them is the end-to-end learning approach. So incorporate vision and control. This is the key. Control also is part of learning. That's not hard-coded. I've said that after the Tesla AI Day, that there's, in my view, too much explicit knowledge being introduced into control software of Tesla, meaning once the vision takes over and sees what's out there, somebody has to control the car. And that, to me, just feels a little bit too much, let's say, that feels a little bit too much explicit to me. That's just my point here. I think there is certainly things that Tesla can learn maybe from Wayve. I would encourage Tesla to start looking into more end-to-end learning solutions for their applications. And one of them is, of course, again, like I said many times in the podcast, video animation, sort of a DALL-E type version of video animation. So video that learns, that develops through learning, and therefore is more realistic, maybe, instead of having explicit knowledge programmed into the video animation. So we believe that end-to-end learning in the end is the path to success. This is something that we share. It's our belief. And I think Wayve might not be a company that we invest in, again, because of some of their business choices, like the last mile grocery delivery doesn't sound like an interesting choice to us. But from a conceptual perspective, I think we're very much interested in the company. So to summarize, two events in the last couple of weeks or days even. One is that Cruise got the license to do self-driving cabs in San Francisco. Interesting point. We believe that the Cruise approach is too cumbersome and nevertheless has to be taken seriously as a competitive threat. Wayve is a little bit further out, but interesting because it's an end-to-end learning solution. Don't know exactly how the details are, but I think as a concept, end-to-end learning is the holy grail of a self-driving AI, and we hope that Tesla sooner or later will also incorporate that into their solution. Thank you.